Salman Rushdie was stabbed as he was about to deliver a lecture in New York. This attack isn't surprising. It's a manifestation of the kind of religious fanaticism that leads savages to burn books instead of reading them and to murder thinkers instead of debating them. For Rushdie, this all started over 30 years ago, and today, I want to tell you all about it. Salman Rushdie was born in India in 1947 to a Muslim family. Although he now lives in the United States, he spent a big part of his life living in the UK. That's where Rushdie started his career as a writer and where he first received critical acclaim. He is most famous for the 1988 book The Satanic Verses, which, despite being very well received by the critics, generated a huge controversy in the Muslim world because of its allegedly blasphemous nature. I am not going to summarize the book here, since you should read it yourself, but I'll try to address some of the main issues. First, the title. Here you need to understand a little bit about Islamic mythology. Muslims believe that God revealed the text of the Quran to Muhammad through the archangel Gabriel. In the process of receiving this revelation, which took 23 years, it is alleged that Muhammad was deceived by Satan, or Shaitan, and included in the Quran some verses of this supposedly satanic origin.
In the early days of Islam, Prophet Muhammad had trouble winning over converts to his new religion with its single God. According to the story, Muhammad was tricked by the devil into a compromise. He told the people of Mecca that they could also worship their favorite pagan goddesses. But when the angel Gabriel later revealed Satan's evil deed, the so-called Satanic Verses were removed from the Quran. Many Muslims don't believe the incident ever took place.
Of course, none of this really matters because the Quran, just like the Bible, is a human work and all claims of divine inspiration are just magical thinking. But it matters to us when it comes to Rushdie's book and to the hatred that it received.
The Satanic Verses form the subplot of the novel. Rushdie creates a fictional and flawed prophet who he calls Mahund, the derogatory term the early Crusaders gave to Muhammad. It means devil or false prophet. The city of Mecca becomes Jahiliyyah, the name given to the pagan time of ignorance before Islam.
They're visionary sequences. They're not intended to have the validity of a kind of historical event because they happen in somebody's dream. So obviously in a dream things change, names change, places change shape, nothing is as it really is in life. And I wanted those sequences to have that kind of visionary quality. And so quite deliberately did not call the city Makkah. I did not call Muhammad Muhammad because I didn't want it to be a picture of him, but a kind of dream of him.
It's not the first time a writer had questioned the divine nature of Islam, but none had been so bold as to use the contentious Satanic Verses as the basis for a novel.
For some Muslims, the book was unacceptable. They thought that the title suggested that the Quran itself was satanic and thought that it insulted some of the most important figures of Islam. They said that it offended Muhammad and his wives, including his child bride Aisha, and that it even mocked the Ayatollah Khomeini, who at the time was the supreme leader of Iran. Now, whether or not the book is blasphemous is debatable, and many Islamic and literary scholars have put forward many different views. Some have said that the offensive parts are all happening in a dream within the book, and so they are not really meant to send a message or to represent Rushdie's thoughts. They also said that a lot of the supposed insults against Muhammad and his wives are said by unlikable characters in the book, and who are not portrayed sympathetically at all. This last thing is really important when it comes to art. Imagine what would happen if people claimed that movies like American History X, Schindler's List, or Inglourious Basterds are racist because of their Nazi characters saying racist things. Sure, seen in isolation, the lines that they say in these movies are extremely racist, but the films don't portray them positively. It's actually the opposite. This is the kind of thing that you notice when you actually read a book or watch a movie instead of burning them or murdering the people responsible for them.
Salman Rushdie mortad! Salman Rushdie mortad! Salman Rushdie mortad!
Now, of course, it doesn't matter whether the book was blasphemous or not. People should have the right to mock, criticize, and offend any religion. But it does show that a lot of the criticism against the book wasn't really based on anything anybody read, but instead on what they were being told the book said. Before publication, some people told Rushdie and his publisher that the book might cause offense, but they never thought that it would be something this big. In fact, shortly before publication, Rushdie said to an Indian journalist that it would be absurd to think that a book could cause a riot.
The thing is, I did show it to the book to a number of people who knew the world I was writing about, and it was quite obvious that people of conservative religious views would not like the book. But they hadn't liked anything else I wrote either, so that's not particularly different.
Considering that so many of the offended people never took the time to read the book, you're probably asking yourself, how did this scandal even start? Well, the answer is not so easy. The problem started in India, where the government banned the book only a week after its publication. There, Syed Shahabuddin, a Muslim member of the Indian parliament who, like most of Rushdie's critics, had not read the book, demanded immediate action, claiming that it was a huge offense against Islam and its prophet. He had been alerted about the novel by the Islamic organization Jamal-e-Islami, and it was that organization which, through its Saudi-funded network in the UK, really got the ball rolling. It was them who started disseminating fragments of the book among the Muslim community, urging Muslims to protest its publication. This is something that we've seen in other cases of blasphemy, where it is the supposed victims that go out of their way to disseminate the blasphemous material, trying to get people offended and riled up. If you want to see how that has happened in countries like Poland or the UK, where Christian fundamentalists have opposed blasphemous material, check out our first video on the Blasphemy series. At first, the attempts at getting people angry didn't really work, at least not in any significant way. There were some protests and some anger, most of it in the UK and in India, but it was still a localized phenomenon. Not that it wasn't bad, of course, it was still a shameful display of ignorance and savagery. I mean, bringing back memories of Nazi brown shirts and Stalinist purges, protesters in Bradford, in the UK, publicly burned effigies of Rushdie and copies of the book.
Muhammad Siddiqui was joined by over 1,000 Muslim demonstrators in Bradford on that fateful day. In full view of the police headquarters, Muhammad brought out his fuel-soaked copy of the Satanic Verses.
He took it out of the bag, and somebody with a match came and put it on fire. People were shouting, saying, "Kill the man." There were people actually going that far. There were people on the stage saying, "We are prepared to die for the honor of our prophet." So people's feelings were inflamed again.
The book burning in Bradford, with its echoes of the Nazis, was, the Muslims believe, what was needed to force Britain to take note of their protests. They say they won't rest till every copy of the book is destroyed.
But as obscene as those book burnings were, the controversy about the book was still a relatively small phenomenon. The fact of the matter is that most Muslims, understandably, didn't really care. True, Pakistan and South Africa banned the book, as did Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Bangladesh, Malaysia, and Sudan. But in the majority of Muslim countries, including virtually all Arab states, the Satanic Verses continued to be freely available, even after Islamic organizations called for a ban. And that's despite the absolutely insane rhetoric used by the zealots who opposed the book.
The underlying anger boiled over, as seen in this rare footage from a Bradford Council of Mosques meeting at the time. Muslim men, and in those days it was mostly all men, led the fight back.
We the Muslim in the world condemn this book and call upon the publishers, and the writer and the author of this book to give a public apology to the Muslims of the world, withdraw this book and close it.
Take, for example, the British Pakistani writer Ziauddin Sardar, who said that the book was a direct personal insult against all Muslims, adding the syphilitically demented comment that Because of the book's publication, which he compared to the Holocaust, he now knew what it was like to be raped. That was the level of rhetoric that was coming from those who wanted to fan the flames and create chaos. And eventually, someone heard their call.
On February 14, 1989, in Tehran, the spiritual leader of the Islamic Revolution, Ayatollah Khomeini, issued a religious decree, or fatwa, ordering all Muslims to kill the British Indian writer Salman Rushdie and his publishers for the book's blasphemous attacks on Islam, the Prophet, and the Quran. A bounty of $25,000 was offered to any Iranian who carried out the sentence, and $7,500 to any Muslim of another nationality. He said, "In the name of God Almighty, I call on all zealous Muslims to execute them quickly, wherever they may find them, so that no one else will dare insult Islamic sanctities."
To this day, there are debates about why Khomeini issued the fatwa against Rushdie, including accusation that it was two British scholars who personally asked him to do it.
Kaleem Siddiqui and Ghiyasuddin Siddiqui went to Tehran and asked the Ayatollah to pass the fatwa. I knew because I interviewed both of them. Kaleem was adamant till he died that he did go and he did what he did and was the right thing to do.
Now, it's important to think about the situation of Iran at the time. When the book was published, Iran was coming out of a massive 8-year war with Iraq. This was one of the longest armed conflicts of the 20th century, and it devastated the country. Many people questioned whether the Islamic Republic of Iran would even be able to continue existing, and dissent started to grow even within Khomeini's ranks. So the book was really a godsend for Khomeini. It gave him an opportunity to paint himself as a religious authority for Muslims all over the world. It painted him as a guardian of the faith, and even those who opposed him in Iran needed to either side with him or risk being accused of not caring about Islam. Rushdie and the Satanic Verses were the perfect scapegoat, a common enemy against whom all of that anger and all of that frustration could be directed.
Today's violence means that 16 people have now died in protest at Salman Rushdie's novel.
In the Iranian holy city of Qom today, demonstrators made clear their support for the Ayatollah by declaring their readiness to carry out the death sentence on Mr. Rushdie.
The call to kill Rushdie, led by Iran, soon turned an argument about a book into a global diplomatic crisis. Then, in an act of terror on UK soil, a London bookshop was targeted by Muslim militants.
The bomb went off at 3 o'clock this morning. Anti-terrorist squad officers were called to the scene, and they're investigating a possible link with 3 other attacks on bookshops in London in recent months.
Countries where protests were normally brutally repressed suddenly discovered the wonders of public participation, allowing for thousands of people to march on their streets and demand the death of Salman Rushdie. Every tin pot despot and religious zealot was happy to point at this man whose only crime was that of thought and writing, and claim that he was the real problem. And things quickly got out of control. In the Netherlands, protesters called for the death of Rushdie. The same thing happened in France, where protesters took to the streets calling for the killing of Salman Rushdie and the banning of the book.
Today, a protest took place in Paris with banners reading, "Kill Rushdie."
Death to Rushdie and Allahu Akbar, or God is Great, were chanted between the Barbet and Place de la République metro stations by about 1,000 demonstrators.
The Satanic Verses Affair, as it has come to be known, left no one indifferent. Khomeini, the most prominent Muslim leader in the world, was calling for the assassination of a writer, and many people wanted to obey him.
Nobody was taking the threat lightly. Several Iranian political exiles had been assassinated in Europe in recent years. That afternoon, a hastily arranged meeting at Scotland Yard made an immediate decision to give Rushdie Grade 1 special protection, the highest level of security.
Rushdie had to go into hiding, which he had to do for years, constantly avoiding assassination attempts. He was terrified and, understandably, tried to do anything he could to save himself and all the other people who were connected with the book. He tried apologizing, saying that he regretted the distress caused by the novel, but that didn't matter. Khomeini wanted him dead.
A day later, Ayatollah Khomeini weighed in with his unequivocal response.
Even if Salman Rushdie repents and becomes the most pious man of all time, the Ayatollah said, Muslims should employ everything they've got to send him to hell.
He even invited non-Muslims to do the killing, tempting them with the promise of money. In desperation, Rushdie even tried an apparent conversion to Islam, something that he now regrets.
Repeatedly said that this was a mistake under enormous pressure.
Pressure from whom?
Well, everybody from the British government downwards. But I mean, it wasn't right. You know, I'm not a religious person, and I very rapidly unsaid it. This was 20 years ago, so give me a break.
That also wasn't enough. The Ayatollah Khomeini wanted his head on a stick. And he wasn't the only target. His Italian translator and his Norwegian publisher were both attacked. One was shot, the other one was stabbed. They managed to survive, but with extremely serious injuries. Others were not so lucky.
Les fanatiques islamiques, toujours sur la trace de Salman Rushdie, l'auteur des versets sataniques, condamné à mort par l'Ayatollah Khomeini. Il se cache quelque part en Angleterre sous la protection de Scotland Yard et ce sont ses traducteurs qui sont pris pour cible. Un premier attentat au début de la semaine en Italie et une deuxième opération de ce type, cette fois au Japon.
Hitoshi Igarashi était professeur à l'université de Tsukuba, spécialiste de l'islam. C'est devant un ascenseur près de son bureau dans ce bâtiment qu'une femme de ménage a trouvé mort ce matin, le corps lacéré de coups de couteau. En février 90 à Tokyo, à la parution de l'ouvrage, lors d'une conférence de presse, l'agent littéraire avait déjà été agressé par un fanatique pakistanais.
The worst tragedy happened in Turkey in 1993, where 35 people died in an arson attack aimed at killing Aziz Nesin, the Turkish translator who managed to survive the massacre. The Satanic Verses Affair, as it has come to be known, was probably the first salvo in the wars against offensive speech and the fear of appearing racist, insensitive, or even evil for mocking someone else's belief system. It showed that many people did not dare to offend religion and that there were many who were willing to kill those who offended them. Considering that Rushdie lived in the UK and that by then he was a British citizen, you would expect that the authorities of that country, the land of the Magna Carta, would immediately close ranks in defense of his freedom of expression. But of course, cowards and bootlickers sided with the enemy. Many politicians and public figures of all stripes, even while they were condemning the violence, were also quick to condemn Rushdie for, in one way or another, bringing this on himself. Keith Vass, for example, a former British member of parliament, openly called for the banning of the book.
Even Jimmy Carter, whose presidency was destroyed by Ayatollah Khomeini, denounced the book, calling it an insult to the sacred beliefs of our Muslim friends. Another critic, Prince Charles, said, "I'm sorry, but if someone insults someone else's deepest convictions, well then you shouldn't pretend to be surprised."
Another participant was the Muslim convert Yusuf Islam, formerly the singer Cat Stevens. He also supported the death sentence on Rushdie. He was asked if he would give him shelter.
Yes, I'd try to phone the Ayatollah Khomeini and tell him exactly where this man is.
You don't think that this man deserves to die?
Who, Salman Rushdie?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
And do you have a duty to be his executioner?
No, not necessarily, unless we were in an Islamic state and I was ordered, let's say, by the judge or by the authority to carry out such an act, perhaps, yes.
Would you go to a demonstration where you knew that an effigy was going to be burnt?
I would have hoped that it'd be the real thing, but actually, no, if it's just an effigy, I don't think I'd be that moved to go there.
To make matters worse, instead of presenting a united front against extremism and censorship, many succumbed to fear. In the United States, for example, some stores stopped selling the book, not because they were necessarily against it, but because they feared the savages who hated it.
Tomorrow is the birthday
of George Washington. And tomorrow, the shopping malls of the United States, which contain now 1/3 of the book outlets in this country, will of their own volition not sell that book because they're scared of a foreign despot. Now, in my opinion, for that to happen in this country on Washington's birthday, to be scared of a crazy foreign tyrant in this way is a really serious challenge to what we think of as the safe assumption of free speech and free inquiry, free expression, and the necessity to defend it.
Of course, they were also heroes, people willing to defend Rushdie's rights. But sadly, they seem to be in the minority.
Britain's biggest bookseller withdrew the Satanic Verses from its 430 stores. On the same day, the writer Stephen King called the head of the chain and gave him an ultimatum. If you don't sell the Satanic Verses, you don't sell Stephen King. The book was back on the shelves the next day.
There was police protection. They were all very happy to be at a U2 concert.
Salman Rushdie can't be...
And then they wanted to make a gesture of support. They said, would I come on stage at some point during the show with them? And I thought, okay, why not?
Real devils don't wear horns.
Salman Rushdie, ladies and gentlemen, I bow to the superior man.
The cowardice demonstrated by authorities and the media sent the wrong message. It told the savages that, yes, there was something so offensive about the book that violence was an understandable response, and that threats were enough to paralyze the Western world. Years later, we see the same shameful cowardice in episodes like those of the Charlie Hebdo massacre in France or the Jyllands-Posten cartoons in Denmark, but that's a story for another day. This pathetic and cowardly response to the Satanic Verses Affair has continued ever since the book was first published. In 2007, for example, when Rushdie was given a knighthood in the UK, some politicians opposed the honor by claiming that he had provoked violence with his book. That was the position of Lord Ahmed of Rotherham, who at the time was a member of the House of Lords, and who went as far as claiming that Rushdie had blood on his hands. As a side note, you might find it interesting that this despicable human being went on to blame a conviction for dangerous driving on a supposed Jewish conspiracy. And he was also found guilty of attempting to rape a boy and a girl, both of whom were under 13. He was also accused of sexually assaulting someone while he was a member of parliament and resigned from the House of Lords right before he could be expelled. I know, it's not really relevant to our story, but, fuck that guy. Other British politicians, including conservative ones like Stuart Jackson, also condemned the awarding of the knighthood to Rushdie over the supposed provocation or offense that it represented. As the years passed, and although he remained a controversial figure, the pressure on Rushdie started to decrease. According to the security agencies charged with his protection, the threats against his life had gone down. Obviously, they would never be zero, but at least it made life livable. He even reached the point where he could make jokes about the ordeal that he experienced.
It can be scary, it can be bewildering, etc. But there are things that you gain. There are a lot of women who are attracted to you in this condition.
Really? I didn't think there was any condition that they'd be attracted to me.
You are a dangerous man. There are very beautiful women. The fatwa wrapped around you like kind of sexy pixie dust. Fatwa sex is beginning to circle around you. But that is not the only benefit. For example, you don't have to go to anything you don't want to go to. So like your cousin is giving a reading of his lousy poetry book, and you say, sorry, can't make it, fatwa.
Fatwa.
Somebody calls you, says, can you come pick me up at the airport? You say, can't make it, fatwa, can't make it.
The problem, of course, was that even though Rushdie felt safer, the fatwa continued to exist. The death of Khomeini didn't end the fatwa, and the Islamic Republic had confirmed many times that it was still valid law. True, in 1998, the Iranian and British came to a sort of agreement about Rushdie. But Iran clarified many times since then that the fatwa continued. So it was only a matter of time before some pathetic moron with dreams of martyrdom try to carry out this religious order.
The news that's come out of New York State just within the last hour about the novelist, the author Salman Rushdie, who has been stabbed at an event in New York State. Details still coming in, but police say that he has been flown to hospital and that someone is in custody. You'll remember, I'm sure, that Salman Rushdie was the subject of an Islamic fatwa a long time ago now, after the Satanic Verses was published.
The perpetrator of the crime was a basement-dwelling fanatical loser who, according to his own mother, who has since disowned him, became radicalized after visiting his father in Lebanon. He stabbed Rushdie 10 times in his stomach, face, and neck. Thankfully, Rushdie is doing better, but recovery is going to take a long time. What happened to Rushdie was a travesty, a true horror story, a reminder of the price that we must be willing to pay for freedom. But I have a lot of problems with the way this story has been covered. For starters, because of the fatwa, it has been portrayed as an Iranian issue. The problem is that this goes beyond Iran, and it actually connects with the Islamo-fascist ideology that has poisoned the minds of millions of Muslims around the world. An ideology that demands obedience not only from its followers, but from everyone else. They expect us to censor ourselves, to give up our right to free speech simply because their beliefs in magic and wizardry can be offended. Second, it has been shown as a rather isolated case, as if Salman Rushdie was an exception instead of the rule when it comes to prominent figures who blaspheme against Islam. Fanatics and zealots have spilled a lot of blood in their attempt to silence those who disrespect their prophet, and people like Theo van Gogh in the Netherlands and the staff of the Charlie Hebdo magazine in France should serve as a constant reminder of the real threats that exist against those who openly defy their Bronze Age beliefs. And you don't even need to be a prominent person to be targeted by these savages. Today, October 16th, is the anniversary of the murder and decapitation of Samuel Paty, a French school teacher who, in a class about free speech, showed a cartoon of Mohammed. He had warned his students that he would show the cartoon, and gave people the option not to be there if they were offended. But that wasn't enough. Brahim Nina, the father of a girl who wasn't even in the class, started an online campaign against Samuel Paty, calling him a thug and accusing him of showing pornography to the students. People got riled up. Abdel Hakim Sefrioui, the imam of a Parisian mosque, published videos on his website attacking Paty and calling for his firing. And eventually, someone took the matter in his own hands. Abdullah Abuyerovich Anzorov, a Chechen refugee, attacked Paty as he was walking home. He cut off his head and posted a photo of it on Twitter, together with this warning.
In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful, from Abdullah, the servant of Allah, to Macron, leader of the infidels, I executed one of your hellhounds who dared to belittle Muhammad, comb his fellow human beings before a harsh punishment is inflicted on you.
Allahu Akbar,
But regardless of what demonstration of Islamic fascism we're talking about, there are always many useful idiots out there trying to justify, understand, or put into context the violence launched against blasphemers. Oh well, they say, I don't justify violence, but freedom of speech has limits. We should be careful not to offend the faith of those in the Muslim world. There is something deeply offensive about that line of thought. First of all, it removes all agency from Muslims, portraying them as blind drones who are unable to control the rage generated by offense to their religion. It's an offense against all Muslims who, even though they might be offended by Rushdie's book, would never think of using that as an excuse for violence.
Despite their anger, the fatwa wasn't supported by many Muslims in the UK.
Rather than the victims, we looked as the aggressors.
So do you condemn the death threats?
Certainly, most certainly.
Rushdie was actually unjustly condemned. He's not the enemy that the Muslims thought he was.
I've always thought more freedom is better than less freedom. And censorship by a state is wrong. So when the fatwa happened, lots of us got together and issued a statement saying we defend the right of the writer in this case because it struck me as wrong. Absolutely nobody should be killed for words, for nothing.
And yet there is always a chorus of, let's be honest, mostly liberal white people saying what in reality amounts to, you can't expect any more from those people. That is how these morons understand tolerance and opposition to racism, by lowering the bar to meet that of the most savages among us. They are insulting those Muslims who have defended the right to free speech or who have opposed fundamentalism and who have at times paid the ultimate price for having that stance. That's what happened in 1989 to Imam Abdullah Aghdal, great Imam of Belgium, who was murdered with his deputy for having opposed the fatwa against Rushdie. And that's without mentioning the fact that, by far, Muslims are the greatest victims of blasphemy laws and blasphemy accusations. They are the ones being tortured, raped, and murdered as punishment for perceived blasphemies in countries like Iran, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and Yemen. When we say that we cannot criticize the beliefs of the radical minority that wants to control our speech, we are spitting in the face of the brave women and men who have opposed the fundamentalists in their religion and in their countries. We are dishonoring the memory of the over 200 people who have been killed in Iran just in the last few weeks for opposing the brutality of the religious dictatorship of the Ayatollahs.
Over the last 4 weeks, widespread strikes and heated protests have rocked Iran. The authorities have cracked down hard. Rights groups say more than 200 people have been killed in clashes with police and thousands have been detained. The unrest started when a young woman died while in the custody of the morality police. That young woman was 22-year-old Jina Mahsa Amini from Iran's Kurdish region. She was arrested for not complying with the strict rules on wearing a headscarf. Now she's become the face of the protest movement that's seen thousands of women take to the streets.
Before we finish, I think it's important to make something absolutely clear. You don't need to like the Satanic Verses. And in fact, it's completely okay if you personally feel that you're offended by what Rushdie wrote or by what any other writer or cartoonist created. That's fine. That's your own personal right. There are also things that offend me, so I am obviously not suggesting that you can't ever be offended. Being offended is fine. The important thing is that your personal offense, just like mine, should never entitle either of us to keep other people from being offensive against our beliefs. I'll be the first to admit that freedom is messy, and so it forces us to accept that others might have views and opinions that we dislike. And we can criticize and debate them for what they say or believe, but we can never use that disagreement as a justification for violence or censorship. Our choice is not between tolerance and hatred, it's between freedom and submission. And I don't know about you, but I am not willing to sacrifice my ability to speak up just to protect others from offense. Non serviam, and since we're talking about Iran, Nabeyom Huriye Islami. Down with the Islamic Republic. See you next time.